Definitions and scope. A home inspection is a non-invasive visual examination of the accessible areas of a residential property performed for a fee, which is designed to identify defects within specific systems and components defined by the standards of practice that are both observed and deemed to be material by the inspector. So, are you required to find all the problems in a home? No. You are required to report upon those defects that you both observe and deem to be or consider to be material as defined by the standards of practice. A material defect is a really serious problem. The scope of work may be modified by the client and inspector prior to the inspection process. Now, a system is a term that we use in the home inspection industry and in your inspection report. And a system is an assembly of various components that function as a whole. And a component is part of that system. So take a gas-fired furnace system. That's a system, and there are many parts to that system. One is the normal operating control thermostat, the service switch, the electric switch on the side to turn off the unit. Maybe there's a gas valve, right? Another component would be the panel door to the air filter, two more components, the burners, the valve, the igniter, the blower fan, heat exchanger, which is not visible, but it's a component of this system, get it? And a general home inspection, also a home inspection or a standard home inspection, is the process by which an inspector visually examines the readily accessible systems and components of a home and operates those systems and components using a standards of practice as a guideline. And the word inspect, we use that a lot, to examine readily accessible systems and components safely using normal operating controls. A non-invasive visual examination relates to the fact that home inspectors are not required to dismantle or remove components. A home can include apartments, condos, residential, single-family homes. So when we talk about home inspections, we're talking about residential buildings. However, InterNACHI's residential standards of practice applies to properties with 4 or fewer residential units and their attached garages and carports. Many local authorities limit inspections to a building with a maximum of 4 units. So if you are inspecting a building, I was a home inspector, I have inspected buildings, and you get into the property and there are multiple units. The front egress door will have maybe the name of the people living inside or the house number, right? And you check the hallway, you have 6 down the hallway. You now have to use a different standards of practice. So if there are 4 or fewer, you can use the home inspection standards of practice, the residential standards of practice for residential buildings. An inspection must include an agreement between the inspector and the client about what you're going to inspect, what systems and components will be inspected. Again, this standards of practice applies to properties with 4 or fewer residential units and their attached garages and carports. The inspection image above there is of a new commercial building with some residential units on the 2nd floor. An inspection of this type of structure with more than 4 units and a big commercial property like this would likely require the inspector to use the international standards of practice for inspecting commercial properties. And InterNACHI has those standards at nachi.org/COMSOP, C-O-M-S-O-P. This picture here, inspection image, is of a heat pump system. And this inspection image is of a component of that heat pump system, which is the condensate pump. So that's the difference between a system and a component. The home inspection is based on the observations made on the date of the inspection and not a prediction of future events. So the word condition is a term that's used a lot in a home inspection report. And the condition is the visible and conspicuous state of being of an object. So if you find watermarks on the ceiling, you may report upon the apparent condition. It could feel wet to the touch. You're not required to use a moisture probe or a meter of any sort. It's a visual-only inspection. So the condition would be showing indications of water intrusion, creating or resulting in watermarks that were observed during the time of the home inspection. So a condition is the visual, obvious, conspicuous state of being of a particular object that you're inspecting. And evaluate is to assess the systems, structures, components of a property. And the term unsafe means, in the inspector's opinion, a condition of an area, system, or component or procedure that is judged or thought of, or in your opinion, to be a significant risk of injury during normal day-to-day use. The risk may be due to damage, deterioration, improper installation, or a change in acceptable residential construction standards. An unsafe deck may come across in your experience. You may come across an unsafe deck in your experience. I have had that in my occupation, in my experience. So where the deck is attached to the house, it's called the ledger board, and there should be flashing properly installed at that ledger board. Well, there wasn't on this deck, and water got behind the ledger board and deteriorated completely the house structure to which this deck was attached. And it was unsafe, in my opinion, to walk upon that deck. So I had to tell everybody. I actually had tape, and I taped the slider door with a warning tape, and I highly encouraged everyone not to step on that deck because, in my opinion, the condition was unsafe. So that's where you would use something like that. Report means to express or communicate or provide information in writing or give a written account of. And in the inspection report, you know what that is. That is written communication of any material defects found during the inspection. Remember that as an inspector, you can only report on what you see given reasonable access. To get a better idea of what an actual home inspection report looks like, InterNACHI provides sample reports. So feel free to use them to make your inspection reports better. And click that link there. Defects. A home inspection will not reveal every issue that exists or could ever exist, but only those material defects observed on the date of the inspection and deemed to be material. A home inspection does not predict future events. The home inspector is not required to determine future conditions. For example, a roof may leak at any time, even right after you perform a home inspection. And there were no indications of a roof leak observed. We recommend that home inspectors write their reports in the past tense. And we have an article written by our legal counsel making that recommendation. So your inspection reports should be written that reflects the standards of practice, but also written in the past tense. A material defect is a specific issue with a system or component of a residential property that may have a significant adverse impact on the value of the property or that poses an unreasonable risk to people. So going back to that deck collapse, if you, in your opinion, think the deck is unsafe and a deck collapse is imminent, that would be a material defect. The fact that a system or component is near, at, or beyond the end of its normal useful life is not in itself a material defect. So if the roof shingle covering, asphalt shingle covering, the roof covering is cracked up and there's missing pieces, it's beyond its service life, that's not necessarily a material defect. For example, a cracked, open, and moving foundation or a fatally dangerous electrical condition, such as a dead front cover that's been removed and not put back. So the exposed electrical components within that distribution panel are live and could electrocute somebody. That would constitute a material defect. But a roof covering that had exceeded its intended lifespan would not. Anything or any condition that would result in hurting someone, in your opinion, should be considered a material defect. Ultimately, these are going to be your judgment calls to make this decision, in your opinion. To help, please learn as much as you can by taking InterNACHI's online courses for home inspectors and read the following article about what a material defect is, and click that link there. Let's go to the home inspection report. Home inspection report is defined by the standards of practice. Home inspection shall identify in written format defects within specific systems and components defined by these standards that are both observed and deemed to be material by the inspector. Inspection reports may include additional comments and recommendations. And deem is a term that we use. It just simply means regard or consider in a specified way. I deem that to be unsafe. An inspector may observe a defect but not consider it to be a material defect as defined by the standards of practice. An inspector may not observe a defect and therefore would not be required to include it in the inspection report. For example, if there was a material defect located within the home but was beyond the scope of visual inspection and the inspector did not observe it, the inspector would not be required to report upon that defect. The inspector must both observe and deem the defect to be material. The home inspector is not required to find all defects in a home, house, or building inspected according to the InterNACHI home inspection standards of practice.